Welcome back. We've got still have Mr. Bayo Rotimi here. But looking at these figures, when yes, government says the growth in the non-oil sector, which is led by the transport sector, which grew by 21.76%, largely because of the investments in that sector by the government. But if you look at it vis-a-vis that of the private sector, shouldn't we be concerned? Because look, we don't have that much investment, or shouldn't we? What should we be targeting at that stage?
Thank you. I think bottom line, for us to have the kind of economic growth we're looking for, it has to be private sector driven. And some functionaries of government, I think particularly the Vice President, has spoken consistently about the need to improve private sector participation. So a number of issues come to the fore, and I think some of them have been mentioned by the guest in Abuja. It's important that that enabling environment is created. It's important that capacity is built amongst the private sector participants, particularly those at the lower end of the ladder. It's important that they can access finance, friendly finance, not the one that requires tangible collateral and all of that. So there is a lot that needs to be done on the private sector side. But for the private sector to thrive, government must now be able to create that environment that encourages that participation. So like you mentioned in the transportation sector, the principal activity, investments that is going on is coming from government. But government does not have the capacity. So government must create a framework that allows private sector to come in. So this is where I would say, if you look at the ICRC, the Infrastructure Regulatory Commission, my view is that that concessioning process is rather tedious. There is a need to simplify it. So they may need to look at that legislation again and say, how do we make this friendlier so that we can truly encourage public-private participation? Because the bulk of the critical infrastructure this country needs cannot be funded by government. Government just does not have the bandwidth. The entire national budget is barely 8 or 9% of GDP. So government's participation is limited, but we must create that framework. And what we have at the moment is tedious. For you to get a project through ICRC now, you are bogged down with bureaucracy and all manner of bottlenecks.
But the growth in that non-oil sector notwithstanding, yes, driven by the investment there by government, but I'm just wondering, with respect to the employment market out there, it is still huge. We have lots of people almost on a regular basis who constantly remind you of the realities out there.
Right.
We haven't cracked it yet.
I agree. For people, the man on the street, the man and woman on the street, for them to start to feel the impact of any economic growth, Nigeria's economy should actually be growing at easily 7 to 10% on a consistent basis for several years. That is the only time. So that is why when we analyze and appraise these numbers and we are seeing marginal growth, it simply goes to confirm why the man on the street cannot feel the impact of government's activity. So there is a need for us to take a step back. There are a few things I would like government to focus on. I think, like I mentioned earlier, get the politics right. If the politics is right, local as well as foreign investments will be attracted. So I was listening to your newspaper review this morning, and you were talking about the debate about rule of law and the comments of the president. Yeah. That is totally unhelpful, because if you want to attract businesses locally and internationally into this economy, the rule of law is central. So if you want to subordinate the rule of law, then it sends negative signals outside. So number one, get the politics right. Number two, get security right. A lot of, if you interrogate the GDP numbers, particularly crop production, you will see a sharp decline. If you look at livestock, you will see an equally sharp decline. These are the places where employment is created. But when
manufacturing too.
Oh, yes. You know, so these are the areas that can really put a lot of our people into work. But if these areas are declining, then it is no wonder that the poverty index is as high as it is. So there is a need for us to get the security infrastructure right. We need to find a way to deal with these threats that are really, really impacting on growth.
You know, if our population is growing at 3%, and then the GDP lagging behind, are we giving that the right kind of attention? Yes, much as we may have the ERGP, but what should we be doing about population growth as well?
Well, Chamberlain, my view is that we are almost in a state of emergency when you consider the negative impact of that explosion of the Nigerian population. You know, by 2050, they say that we will have, I can't remember what the figure is, probably close to a billion Nigerians. Now, my sense is, unless we create policies, unless we create an environment, unless we create growth that is inclusive, a lot of the growth we are seeing today or have seen in the last 10 years or 15 years easily has not been inclusive. There was a time Nigeria was growing at 6 or 7%, but it still was not trickling down to everybody. Most of the people were left behind.
Why do you think that was?
Well, because the policies are largely elitist. Ajiri was saying in Abuja that of all of the credit available in the Nigerian financial system, 98% of it goes to the high end, and 2% goes to the rest of us. So the 2% is where the 37 million micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, that is where they show up. How can 37 million businesses be attracting only 2% of the credit available in an economy? So there is a need for a fundamental overhaul, you know. But I recognize that banks are not charities, and that is where the issue of the development finance institution comes to play. So we really have to restructure our development finance framework for us to really, really make the impact that we need.
But it looks as if it's still quite a job of work to do, because remember, only recently when the monetary and fiscal policies, the arguments saying, look, what should we do about the MPR, the interest rate, and then the argument was, no, you can't just bring it down to single digit just like that. So we still can't seem to agree on how we should pursue that.
I agree. Monetary and fiscal authorities traditionally tend to butt heads, not just in Nigeria.
When does national interest come in this case?
Well, that is where the political will, and that is where leadership comes. You have to focus on policies that will impact the majority of the people. So when there is a tussle, should we tighten monetary policy because we want to keep inflation down, or we want to keep money supply down, vis-a-vis should we spend more money because we want to boost economic activity? Now, somebody must sit down, weigh on a balance those two, and determine which one will impact more Nigerians, particularly the ordinary Nigerian. Every economic policy will have positive and negative sides, but you then put it on a scale, and when you see that consistently more people benefit from one policy vis-a-vis the other, then that's what you go, in spite of the politics around it. You know, because right now we still have to deal with our subsidy-related issues. You know, so it is inconvenient. This is not the time any government wants to broach the issue of a removal of a petroleum subsidy. But these are some of the critical underpinnings that are slowing our economy down. We cannot be dashing away ₦1 trillion plus easily, monies that could go into social investment, healthcare, education, and the like. We cannot be running an NNPC that is unaccountable. It has to be unbundled. It has to be made more accountable. It has to be made commercially driven, commercially oriented. So there are a lot of institutional moves that need to happen, and we must find the courage to do that.